They say the river that forgets its source will one day dry up and wonder why. Ngozi, Fareedah, and Bisi forgot, and what came looking for them was not thirst. It was something with no legs, no eyelids, and absolutely no mercy. By the time you finish this story, you will understand why our people say that money that comes too easily was never free, it was only delayed. Once upon a time, in a cracked one-room apartment in Ajegule, Lagos, 3 girls who had grown up calling each other sister were trying to stretch nothing into something. Ngozi was patching the only pair of jeans she owned for the 3rd time. Fareedah sat on the floor counting coins like a woman counting the heartbeat of a dying hope. And Bisi, the youngest, the dreamer among them, was staring at her cracked phone screen, watching an old schoolmate post pictures from a rooftop pool in Dubai. Our elders say the eye that always compares itself to another man's harvest will starve while standing in its own farm. Bisi's eyes were starving. She used to borrow pencil from me in JSS too. Look at her now. Ngozi did not even lift her head. Some people just carry luck on their shoulders. It is not luck, Fareedah said, and not for the first time. My auntie in Wari, the one they whisper about, she is not a witch. She is something else. She has answers. Ngozi sucked her teeth so hard you would think she wanted to swallow the whole room. We are not doing jazz, Fareedah.
But the proverb says, hunger has no calendar. It does not wait for you to be ready. That same night, the landlord banged on their door like a man trying to wake the dead. 6 days, 6 days, or your load goes outside, with or without rain. And in that moment, even Ngozi, the one who always had a sharp answer for everything, had nothing left to say. 3 grown women, 1 leaking ceiling, 6 days standing between them and the street. If you have never felt that kind of silence, the silence of 3 people who all know they have no plan, then count yourself blessed, because that silence is louder than any argument. And what they did not know that night, as they lay awake listening to rain leak through the ceiling, was that this was the last peaceful silence the 3 of them would ever share again. To understand how 3 sensible girls ended up at the edge of a mangrove asking a stranger for a way out, you must first understand how they arrived in that one room to begin with. Because every river has a source, and theirs was bitter long before it ever met that snake. Ngozi was the daughter of a tailor who died owing 4 different cooperative societies, and from the day they buried him, the cooperative men treated Ngozi's mother like a debt with legs. Ngozi dropped out of Polytechnic in her 2nd year, not because she failed, but because there was no longer money for her to continue while her 2 younger siblings still needed school fees. Our elders say the firstborn does not choose to carry the family's load. The load simply finds its way onto the firstborn's head while everyone else is looking away. Fareedah's story was quieter and crueler in its quietness. Her father had 2 wives, and Fareedah's mother was the second, the one nobody in the family fully accepted, the one whose children were given leftovers, literally and otherwise, at every family gathering. Fareedah grew up sharp-tongued because softness had never once protected her. She had wanted to study law. She ended up selling recharge cards by the roadside instead, watching her stepbrothers go to universities abroad, funded by a father who barely remembered her birthday. And Bisi was the one whose mother had raised her alone after Bisi's father simply vanished one Tuesday morning and never returned. No letter, no phone call, nothing. The way a man disappears, not because he died, but because he chose to.
Bisi grew up believing that the people who are supposed to stay sometimes don't, and that belief made her chase anything that promised permanence, even when permanence wore a dangerous face. 3 different wounds, 1 shared room, 1 shared hunger. They had met at 16 at a church youth program none of them even remembers clearly anymore. And somehow, in a city as merciless as Lagos, they had managed to remain sisters by choice for nearly a decade. Our people say, blood makes you relatives, but loyalty through hard times is what makes you family. By every measure that mattered, these 3 were family. Which is exactly why what eventually happened between them would not just be a story about a snake. It would be a story about whether love survives money, or whether money eventually always asks love to step aside. 2 days after the landlord's warning, they boarded a bus to Warri. 8 hours of potholes and hawkers banging on the windows, and Bisi crying quietly while pretending she wasn't, and Ngozi pretending she didn't notice. The compound sat at the edge of a mangrove, where the air carried salt, and underneath the salt, something older than salt. The auntie was not what anyone expects when they hear they whisper about her. No charms, no wild eyes, just a calm woman in a white wrapper, sitting under a udara tree, like she had been expecting exactly these 3 faces since the day they were born. You did not come because you are hungry for food, she said, before a single one of them opened their mouth. You came because you are hungry for a life that no longer humiliates you. Am I lying? Nobody answered. The silence answered for them. There is a way, she continued, but hear me well, because I will only say this once. The mouth that swallows the yam quickly is not always the mouth that enjoys it. Once you begin this, you do not stop because you want to. You stop when it permits you to stop. She led them past the mangrove to a small shrine where a single python lay coiled in a brass bowl, its scales glowing faintly green, the way embers glow long after the fire is supposedly dead. This is Ekomeh, the auntie said. She does not belong to one person, she belongs to a circle. 3 points, 3 of you, 1 circle. As long as the circle holds, she gives generously, the way a mother feeds a child she loves. The day the circle breaks, she collects, the way a debt collector visits a man who has been avoiding his own door. Collects what, ma? Bisi asked, already shrinking. The auntie looked at her the way one looks at a child about to touch fire. Whatever she decides, she is old. Ngozi, who had been quiet the whole journey, finally spoke the question all 3 were carrying. How do we begin? All 3 hands touching her scales at the same time. After tonight, she will visit each of you in your dreams once a month and give you 1 name. That name is the only person you are permitted to ask anything from until her next visit. 1 name, not 2 strangers, not a kind cousin, not a sympathetic friend. 1 name. And if we ask someone outside that name? Fareedah asked. Then you have stepped outside the circle with your own legs, the auntie said. And a circle a person breaks with their own hands is not a circle anymore. It is an open door. And open doors invite whatever is passing by. Before they touched that bowl, the auntie said one final thing, almost too quietly to hear. There is a 4th row I have not mentioned. I save it because no one ever believes it until it has already cost them something.
None of the girls asked what it was. They were too hungry to ask the right questions. Remember that rule. We will return to it, and when we do, it will explain everything. All three placed their hands forward together. The python's tongue moved once, slow and deliberate, touching each palm in turn, the way a mother checks each of her children's foreheads for fever before she sleeps. That night, on the bus home, all three of them dreamt the very same name for the very first time. Our elders say, a wonder you witness alone, you may doubt. A wonder three people witness together, you cannot. The name was a man none of them had ever met, a contractor called Otumba Lekan, who the very next week sat beside Ngozi at a hair salon as though placed by an invisible hand, and within 20 minutes of pleasant talk, offered to clear her entire rent and add 500,000 naira for her trouble. His eyes pleasant but slightly unfocused, like a man speaking from inside a dream he had not chosen. It worked. It actually, truly worked.
For months, it felt like the kind of story you tell your grandchildren. New names arrived every month like a faithful tide. They left the leaking one-room apartment for a 3-bedroom flat in Lekki. Ngozi started a fashion line that finally had real customers because now she had real capital. Fareedah began a business diploma. Bisi bought her mother a proper bed to replace the one tied together with rope and prayer. But our elders also warn us that the goat that begins to eat well on borrowed grass should remember whose farm it is grazing on, because the owner of the farm is always watching, even when he says nothing. There was a season, around the 7th month, when something almost unraveled everything early. And it had nothing to do with the snake at all. It had to do with a man. His name was Damilare, and he was nobody's dream name. He was simply a young photographer Ngozi met on one of her fashion shoots. Kind in a way none of the men from the dream list ever were. The kind that asks questions instead of only giving answers. He fell for Ngozi the old-fashioned way. The way men used to fall before money learned to do the falling for them. And for the first time since the shrine, Ngozi felt something she hadn't budgeted for. Shame. She could not explain to Damilare why her capital appeared the way it did. She could not explain the names in her dreams, or why she sometimes excused herself at midnight to write a stranger's name on paper before she forgot it by morning. Fareedah warned her plainly, a circle of 3 has no room for a 4th person who asks real questions. Ngozi knew her sister was right, and it broke something in her quietly, the way a crack breaks a clay pot long before the pot finally falls and shatters. She ended things with Damilare with no real explanation, and he left confused, telling her, "You are hiding something, and whatever it is, I hope it's worth what it's costing you." Our elders say, a wise man's parting words are often a prophecy nobody wanted to hear. That heartbreak should have been a warning. Instead, the girls buried it under more money, more names, more proof that they had chosen correctly. Our people say, a wound covered with wealth does not heal. It only stops complaining out loud. They told themselves they'd stop once they were settled. They told themselves this wasn't really jazz, just luck with a little help. They told themselves a lot of things. And our elders warn us, the snake that has tasted the inside of your house does not forget the smell of your kitchen, and it does not knock before it returns. It was around this time that Bisi's mother, without knowing anything about a shrine or a snake, said something to her daughter that would later feel less like motherly worry and more like prophecy. My daughter, money that comes without sweat is money that will ask for something with blood in it eventually. Be careful. Bisi laughed it off then. She would not laugh later. The crack, when it finally came, began with something so small it felt like nothing at all, and it happened on Bisi's month.
The dream gave her a name, an older businessman called Chief Asagba. But Chief Asagba had traveled to Houston, unreachable, and her younger brother's school fees were due in 5 days she did not have. A friend from her old church, someone with no knowledge of any shrine, any snake, any circle, offered to lend her the money. Simply lend it, just this once. Ngozi found out and her face went the color of ash.
How could you?
Bisi, what have you done?
I didn't mean to.
It's just
How
a
dare you?
loan. It's not from her list. It's outside. It doesn't count. Fareedah said quietly, the way one speaks at a funeral. It is not about whose money it is. It is about who you asked. The circle was never about cash. It was about obedience. A goat tied with a long rope still thinks it is free until the day it reaches the end of the rope. That night, all three of them dreamt the same dream for the first time since the shrine. Not a name this time, but Ekomeh herself, uncoiling slowly in the brass bowl, her green light flickering like a candle disturbed by wind that should not exist indoors. Nothing happened immediately, and that was the cruelest mercy of all, because it let them believe for nearly 3 full weeks that perhaps they had escaped clean. Our elders warn that the quiet before a storm is not peace, it is the storm catching its breath. Do not be fooled the way they were fooled. In those 3 weeks, Fareedah did something none of them expected. She went back to Warri alone, without telling Ngozi or Bisi, to ask the auntie directly whether the damage could still be undone. She offered the auntie money, real money, more than the auntie probably had seen in a year. The auntie refused it with something close to pity in her eyes. My daughter, you cannot bribe a debt that was never about money. You came here hungry for dignity, and dignity is the one thing Ekomeh does not sell. She only lends power, and lent power always returns home, usually with interest, usually to whoever was careless enough to leave a door open. Fareedah went back to Lagos and said nothing to her sisters about the visit. Our elders say silence is sometimes love, trying to protect someone from a truth it cannot carry alone. It was also, in this case, a mistake, because the one thing the three of them needed most in their final weeks together was honesty, and Fareedah, the sharpest of them, the one who saw it coming first, chose mercy over warning, and would carry that choice for the rest of her life. Then Bisi's skin began to change. It started at her wrists, a faint shimmer beneath the skin, like a watermark visible only in some light. She thought it was a rash. The doctors found nothing, because some illnesses are not written in any hospital's language. The pattern climbed slowly, week by week, up her arms, and at night, alone, Bisi swore she could feel something moving beneath her own skin, slow, patient, unhurried. The way a creature moves when it already knows you cannot outrun it, because it is not chasing you, it is simply waiting for you to arrive at the place it already knows you are going. By the time she finally screamed loud enough in the night for Ngozi and Fareedah to come running, the pattern had reached her collarbone, and for the first time, all three of them stopped pretending. They packed a bag that same hour and drove through the night back to Warri. The same road, the same potholes, except this time, nobody cried quietly. they cried out loud because some fears no longer deserve to be hidden. The auntie did not look surprised when she opened her gate at 4 in the morning to find 3 terrified women standing there. She had been expecting them, the way she seemed to expect everything. "It's the rule, isn't it?" Fareedah said, before anyone else could speak. "The 4th rule, the one you said you'd save." The auntie nodded slowly. "I told you that no one believes the 4th rule until it has already cost them something. Now you are ready to hear it. Ekomeh does not punish all 3 for one person's mistake. That would be unfair, and she is many things, but she is not unfair. She only collects from the one whose hand left the circle. But here is the part none of you understood. The moment one hand leaves, the circle is no longer 3 points holding a shape steady. It becomes a triangle missing a side, and a shape missing a side cannot protect anything inside it anymore, including the 2 of you who did nothing wrong. From the day Bisi asked outside the circle, all 3 of you have been standing in an open house, whether or not you are the one who opened the door."
This was the rule they never asked about, the one swallowed by hunger and hurry months earlier. And now it stood in front of them fully grown, impossible to undo. "Then take the debt from me," Bisi sobbed, lifting her shimmering arms. "Take money, take anything." "She doesn't want money from you anymore, my daughter. You already used your money privilege the day you asked outside. Now she only wants the original payment, the thing all 3 of you already agreed to the day you put your hands forward." Ngozi grabbed the auntie's wrapper, something she would never have dared a year ago. "What payment? She said come back richer. She never said." "She said," the auntie cut in, calm and final, "as long as the circle holds, she gives. I told you exactly what would happen the day it broke. You heard a blessing. You didn't hear the warning underneath. That's not her fault. That's hunger talking louder than fear." For 7 days they tried everything. Pastors, prayers, even a herbalist 3 villages over who took one look at Bisi and refused to touch her, saying simply, "This one already belongs to the river now." Fareedah, in her desperation, even tracked down Otumba Lekon, the very first name on their list, and begged him for help, not knowing whether he even remembered giving them anything at all. He looked at her with the same pleasant, unfocused eyes he'd always had and said only, "I don't know what you're talking about, my dear," before his driver quietly closed the car door between them. Our elders say, the hand that fed you in your hunger does not always remember your face once the hunger ends, especially when that hand was never fully its own to begin with.
On the 7th night, Bisi's voice left her completely. Not lost, taken, slowly, syllable by syllable over days, the way water leaves a cracking riverbed. Her eyes turned a pale, unfocused green that no human eye holds naturally. By morning, what lay in that bed in Wari was no longer entirely the girl who used to borrow pencils and dream of rooftop pools. Ngozi and Fareedah buried an empty box because there was nothing else they were permitted to carry home. At the small funeral, Bisi's mother, the same woman who had warned her months earlier, said nothing about jars or snakes or shrines. She simply held both Ngozi and Fareedah's hands and said, "She told me you 3 were sisters before blood, sisters by choice. I hope whatever happened to her, the 2 of you choose each other more carefully from now on." Neither of them had the courage to tell her the whole truth. Our elders say some truths are kindnesses only when they remain unspoken, and other times, silence is simply cowardice wearing kindness as a disguise. They never agreed on which one this was. You'd think that would be the end of it, the end of the dreaming, the end of the names, the end of Ekomeh. It wasn't. 2 remain in a circle built for 3, and a circle with a missing point isn't a circle anymore. It's an open door, and open doors, as we have already learned, invite whatever happens to be passing by. In the months that followed, Ngozi and Fareedah tried desperately to return to ordinary life. They sold the Lekki flat. They gave away most of what remained, telling themselves it was cleansing, though some old women in their family quietly said money taken under those conditions does not wash off just because you gave the visible part away. Ngozi poured herself entirely into her fashion line, working harder than she had ever worked in her life, as if exhaustion itself could become a kind of penance. Fareedah finally finished her business diploma, graduating with the kind of grim determination of someone trying to outrun a shadow by simply walking faster than it. For nearly a year, nothing happened. No dreams, no names, no visits. Some nights, they even allowed themselves to hope they had been forgiven, or perhaps forgotten, the way a debt sometimes gets lost in an old, dusty ledger. Our elders say, never mistake a debt collector's silence for mercy. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of someone deciding when, not if. Then, on the 1-year anniversary of Bisi's funeral, almost to the exact date, Fareedah dreamed of Ekomeh again. For the first time since that night, the circle broke. In the dream, the snake did not give a name. She simply opened her mouth. And what came out was not a hiss, but Bisi's voice, hoarse and slow, saying only, "You forgot the 4th rule has a second half. A circle cannot stay broken forever. Eventually, it closes itself with whoever is left standing inside it." Fareedah woke up screaming, loud enough that Ngozi came running from the next room. And when she arrived, she found Fareedah staring at her own collarbone, where, faint as morning mist, the very first shimmer of scales had begun to show. They did not wait 7 days this time. They drove back to Wari that same morning, hearts pounding, hoping desperately that the auntie would have one more answer left to give them, one more way out, one more mercy hiding in some rule they hadn't yet learned. The compound was empty. The Udara tree was still standing. The brass bowl still sat in the small shrine. But the python was gone, and so was the auntie. And the neighbors, when asked, simply shook their heads and said the old woman packed everything and left in the middle of the night nearly a year ago, not long after some girls came crying at her gate at 4 a.m. Nobody had seen her since. Some debts, it turns out, do not need a collector physically present to be collected. They simply need time and patience and the slow certainty of water wearing down stone. Exactly the kind of patience the girls themselves had once refused to have. 3 months after that final dream, Fareedah followed the same path Bisi had walked before her. The shimmer, the silence, the slow green stealing into her eyes. And when it finally finished its work, Ngozi was the only one left standing in a circle that had been built from the very beginning for exactly 3. Today, if you travel to that quiet flat in Lagos, you will find one woman living where 3 sisters once dreamed together. Ngozi does not post pictures anymore. She does not explain to anyone why her 2 closest sisters are gone, because grief like that does not survive being turned into gossip. Some nights, alone, she says she still dreams, not of names, not of money, but of 3 hands reaching toward a brass bowl. And she wakes up unable to tell anymore whether it is a memory or a warning that the circle,
even with only 1 point left, has not yet finished closing. And somewhere at the edge of a mangrove in Warri, where the salt air still carries something older than salt, an empty shrine waits, the way patient things always wait, for the next 3 desperate hands hungry enough to forget that every door that opens for free is a door someone, somewhere, will eventually expect you to walk all the way through.
Our elders did not invent these proverbs to frighten children at night. They built them slowly, generation after generation, the way you build a fence around a well that has swallowed people before. The well does not care how desperate you are when you fall in. It only knows how to be deep. If a door opens for you that no honest hand built, ask yourself what is standing on the other side of it, waiting patiently for you to walk all the way through before it closes behind you forever. Patience humiliates you slowly, yes, but shortcuts humiliate you completely, and they never show you the real price until you have already signed for it with your own hand, and sometimes with the hands of the people you love most in this world. Thank you for watching and for sitting with this story all the way to its end. If it touched something in you, do not let it end here with you alone. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who still believes that every shortcut is free. Because somewhere right now, someone you love is standing closer to that mangrove than they realize.